Well, I've got 9 o'clock on my clock here, so why don't we go ahead and get started here this morning. So first of all, thank you everyone who's joining us today, and I still see names are clicking on here, still logging in as we're going. This is the third of 3 sessions we've offered in our electric vehicle adoption in Montana series. And again, the goal for this series was kind of to put some of the people actually doing the work, some of the experts in the field in front of you to talk about what opportunities there were, what challenges, what technical issues that they're dealing with, things around taxation, things around electrical grid infrastructure, what the fleet of EVs look like here in Montana. So just as kind of a refresher, we did record our first 2 sessions and they're on our website, the same website you logged in through today. And if you want to go back and review those, we started with Nick Schrager talking about an EV owner's perspective. And then we had Larry Flynn from the Montana Department of Transportation discussing how we currently fund our transportation infrastructure and kind of looking at what that would mean if cars aren't paying a per gallon fuel tax, and maybe what some options were to kind of gather some revenue to keep that funding stable. And then we had Kyla Mackey with the Department of Environmental Quality talking a little bit about what that fleet of vehicles in Montana currently looks like on the electrical side. Our next session kind of shifted gears a little bit, and we had David Kack, who's a director for MSU's Western Transportation Institute, talking about some of the more technical issues, kind of from the engineering standpoint on electric vehicles. And then we were fortunate to have Maureen Bach with the Oregon Department of Transportation, and she provided and shared some of the findings they had from a multi-year study of electric vehicles in rural Oregon and charging on a per mile basis, and kind of the technology they used and some of the lessons that they learned with that project as well. And then we were also lucky to have Trevor Graff join us, who's working as an analyst with the Montana Legislative Interim Committee, kind of talking about what the current legislative committee is considering, what kind of things they're looking into, and kind of where also that people could weigh in on some of the things the legislative committee is looking for some feedback on. So, and that brings us to today, and we've had a few questions along the way that we deferred and did not answer. Not that we were trying to avoid them, but we knew we would have some experts to come in that could address those a little more clearly. So today we're going to have 3 speakers. The first 2 are going to represent essentially the utility company perspective, and then we're going to have Neal Ullman talk about electric vehicle kind of charging infrastructure and what's coming in the near term there from the state perspective. So we would love to have questions. You can send them in one of 2 ways. In the chat window, if you send it to everyone, then all will see those. If you want to choose question and answer, they'll only come to the presenters. And then at the end of each speaker's talk, I will ask those questions to our presenters. When all 3 speakers have finished today, we will kind of bring back all 3 as a panel. So if you've thought of additional questions, we'll try to gather those as well. We've had some great questions in the series, so please continue to send those in throughout the morning here, and we'll try to get those to our speakers and see if they can shed some light on those topics that you're thinking about. So with that, let me introduce our first speaker. Dan Rausch is with Northwestern Energy, and as many of you know, Northwestern Energy is an investor-owned utility that's regulated here in Montana. They also serve with South Dakota, which I believe is where Dan is coming to us from here today. So we're going to have Dan then give us a little bit of overview on what Northwestern Energy is doing, planning for, excited about, and maybe concerned about with electric vehicles. So Dan, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, good morning. Thanks, Joel. Good morning, everyone. Again, my name is Dan Rausch. I do live in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Coming to you from the house I actually grew up in on a ranch just west of Aberdeen. So that's also in our service territory. Anyway, I'm the Chief Development Officer and Treasurer of Northwestern. So I think what that means is I'm responsible for initiatives to grow the company, but don't go broke in the process of doing it. So I think that's how the 2 titles merge together here. So here's what I plan to talk about today. I kind of want to go through a couple of things. I want to talk about some of the things we're working on, have some numbers and charts and things like that in here, so you can see the volumes we're seeing. I know that the topic today, wants to talk about what's the impact to our system And then another thing I want to talk about is how we're looking at the EV eco structure. A lot of times when people talk about EVs, that's such a big word. It means a lot of different things in a lot of different areas. So I'll go through and show how we're looking at that and how we're breaking things down. So anyway, I think everyone knows this, but I'll just really quickly, because a lot of people don't. We're still in the early adoption of getting vehicles in our service territory in Montana. You read a lot of stats about the adoption rates on the coast, especially in California. California probably has, or at one time they had over half of all the EVs on the road in the United States were in California. That's not the case anymore. But our adoption rates are a lot lower, so it might not be intuitive to everybody on this presentation what the difference is of a level 1, a level 2, and a level 3. A lot of this discussion today I'll talk about is the level 3, the DC fast chargers that are along the corridor. That's the most near and present situation that we're going to need to go to evaluate and make sure we're doing this properly, and it'll be a good chunk of what I talk about today. But anyway, a level 1 is when you buy a car, they give you a whatever automaker you get, you'll have a basically a plug-in that you can just plug in your garage, like you're plugging in a vacuum cleaner. Then the level 2s are about 10 times faster than that, 5 to 10 times faster than that. You'll see a lot of those in parking garages and things like that. And we have a pilot project that, I'll show you some volumes on that. And then you got the corridor where the level 3, are, and that's where you get the big kilowatts and the big impact of the system. So just a little bit on that. I mentioned our adoption rates in Montana and South Dakota, are definitely behind the rest of the United States, and there's good reasons for it. Our climate and our terrain, the lithium ion batteries just don't behave as well when it's cold out, and we all know how cold it can get in Montana. And then the terrain up and down, is definitely a big usage of these batteries. So it's just much different driving in California in a lot of locations, or Texas, than in a flat state than it is in our state. So we're lagging. So what is driving the EV adoption higher? I got a couple bullet points on here, but one of them is definitely bullet point number one. Just propelling your vehicle forward 1 mile is much less expensive on electricity than it is with gas, especially north of $4 gas right now. So just some quick numbers that I think make sense to everybody, but I'll just say them. If you have a internal combustion car and you're going to stop at a gas station and fill 25 gallons worth, 25 times $4 is $100. But if you're on the corridor, and most EV batteries are about 80 kilowatt hours, give or take. But when we'll talk about it, and part of why we're all here is that there's not EV charging infrastructure set up like there is gas infrastructure. So people get a little bit nervous, and so the average fill we think is about 50 kilowatt hours. You're never going to want to be in that bottom third of the battery because you don't know the next one's coming. But quick math on a 50 kilowatt hour fill up, even on the road, it might be 30. Our rates are 12 cents in your garage, but even on the road, you're going to see things where the charges or the billing is going to be about 35 to 40 cents. So let's just say it's 40 cents a kilowatt hour times 50 kilowatt hours. Well, that's $20. So you're comparing $20, to have now 300 miles to go compared to $100. And just that cost differential is, kind of opening people's eyes. And then the second one is, a number of these automakers are they've stated their intentions to go more EV, but if you just watch the Super Bowl this year, you could see that about every third commercial seemed to be a new EV that was coming out. So there's just a lot more models out there, and as we get closer to 2030, when you go to buy a new car, there's just going to be fewer and fewer options for internal combustion engine, and it looks like it's going to be morphing to EVs here in the kind of next 10 years. And so, I got some other things listed on here, but to keep moving along, EV adoption is going up because A, people are more aware of it, and B, the costs, once they become more aware of it, you see that the costs make it kind of compelling. So I guess before I go to this next slide, what I'll do is I'll talk about what are we doing. Um, we have 10 Tesla charging stations between South Dakota and Montana in our service territory. And what I mean by that is Tesla put them in, but we have separate meters so we know exactly how much volume we're using on those. And those are the DC fast chargers along the corridor. Then also on Front Street in Missoula, we put 2 level 2 chargers in there. And so when people go to work or they park there for a while, they can charge their batteries. And so we put that just as a pilot project, and we just wanted to see what on a premise like that, what kind of volume we could expect to see. And so I'll go through those numbers here in a little bit. So those are a dozen that we have in place right now. We're working with the DEQ, to put another 9 in Montana, some DC fast chargers that we got from the Volkswagen funds. And then, it's been pretty, widely known that the bipartisan infrastructure law, the BIL, has another $43 million that probably Neal will talk about today, that's going in for the next 5 years. So there's things coming up in addition to what we've done. On the 9 that we have a grant, currently to install, we're working with ChargePoint to put those in at town pumps. And I think everyone knows on the call that, town pumps, kind of a widely known gas station convenience store in Montana. So we're going to do 9 of those. Where we're at in that process is we're working on the contracts right now. And then what we're going to have, everyone kind of knows there's some supply chain issues going on. And one of the supply chain issues is these EV chargers. And so once we do get the agreement in place, we're kind of looking at probably 6 to 9 months before we can even get the chargers in our hands. So, that's probably something we're gonna have to talk to the DEQ about. We definitely thought these were going to be installed this year, and now that's in jeopardy now. So that's some things that we're working on in the future. And then also we're going through and trying to figure out the bipartisan infrastructure plan, and what all that means. And I'll go through some of those in a little bit here. So the next slide that I'll quickly go through for you is here's what we're seeing for our DC fast chargers. And we just included these 10 in Montana. No, this does include the South Dakota one. So these are all 10 of them here. So what we're seeing is it's heavily weighted towards kind of July 4th to the end of September. It's that tourist season as people come and see the national parks. And average volumes, are about 3,600 for each one. So for all 10 of them, we have revenues each month of about $36,000. So, what does all that mean relative to what we expected? We didn't know what to expect. And when these started a couple of years ago, I'll go to the next slide. In 2014, when Tesla started installing these, we really didn't notice anything. And then you could kind of see as we got closer to 2020, the volumes had, basically doubled from 10,000 to 20,000 in 2018 to 2020, but now they've almost doubled again. So lots of usage we're seeing on these fast chargers along the corridor, and that's just for Teslas. And so I think the group knows, but on the Tesla chargers, you can only charge a Tesla. But when we go to these universal chargers, you can charge any vehicle. So we expect that the new chargers are going to be more utilized and have higher usage with each individual charging station that we're even seeing on Tesla. But the Tesla ones are going up pretty substantially, and that's very encouraging for us. Here's our level 2 charger in Missoula. I had told the board when we put this in 2018, I'm just showing you the 2021 volume here. And I'm a little bit surprised to see that it's, because it was going into a parking garage, and I assumed it would be, someone working downtown Missoula would probably be charging their car during the day. So I expected more, more consistent pattern, throughout the year and not be heavily weighted towards the summer. But sure enough, it's heavily weighted towards the summer again. And what I had told so we have two chargers there that have two ports each. So there could be up to 4 cars charging at any point in time. And what I told our board is that I didn't think any month we would get, just because of the way level twos work and the speed that we have the Clipper Creek chargers there. I didn't think that we'd get really above 500 to 700 kilowatt hours. I thought we were just limited to by the capacity of them. So I've been pretty pleasantly surprised, seeing that July there at, 1,400 kilowatt hours. That's pretty surprising to me. So the volumes kind of got off to a good start on those level twos, and they've kind of kept up the whole time. So that's been interesting too. So we're probably going to be working with some commercial customers on putting some more, chargers in front of their commercial spots, as more vendors kind of want to offer that service. So anyway, moral of the story there, our consumption is going up and it's better than what I expected. So what does all this mean in terms of, load data? So if you look on this chart, so this shows if all the chargers were plugged in at the exact same time, we would have about 3 megawatt hours. So we know there's some planned DC fast charging coming from what Neal's going to be telling you about. So we think by 2025 that could be somewhere 13-ish or whatever. So we think it's going to kind of quadruple between now and 2025. And that's just based on what we know what the DEQ is working on. So, how much is 3 megawatts or 13 megawatts, relative to our entire system? So if you look at the upper right-hand chart on this page, our peak load is 1,100 megawatt hours. And so what we expect, and I'll have a slide on this here in a little bit, is that between home usage and the DEQ kind of corridor usage, this is kind of where we're at now and what we think the DEQ is going to be working on here in the next 5 years. We've kind of taken a look at this chart here. I think my cursor is showing this, that we would do more over here, and we would, probably get to somewhere around, 30 to 50. So we just ran the range to say on the corridor, we think we're going to have 10 to 50 megawatts over the next 10 years, give or take. And if you can see that's what this means in terms of our relative usage to the system today. So on the one hand, that's a lot of megawatts and it's not small. But on the other hand, our system is pretty big and we think we're in pretty good shape to be able to handle that. Now, what we don't have on that prior chart is the unknown growth, because we don't have time of use pricing. We don't have smart meters in the homes yet. We're working on that. So we really don't have the data to know how much is in people's garages now, but we do know that the chart right over here shows, there's a couple thousand either battery cars or plug-in hybrids that are out there today. And those are doubling each year. So we also know that 80 to 90% of all EV charging will be in the garage. So on the next chart, we take a stab at what do we think that means in terms of, people charging in their garage at night. And so we took a stab at a couple of different growth plans. The conservative growth is just, what's the overall growth rate now? And that's the low number. The aggressive one is we just kind of took, 3 times that, and some quick numbers. There's about 750,000 cars in Montana, and Montana sells about 50 to 60,000 new cars per year. So on that aggressive growth plan to have 60,000 EV cars at the end of the decade, kind of says, once people start adopting these, that 10% of the next 10 years of new cars, could be EVs. Now that's the high case, but the high case would show you that, those charts on the bottom right-hand side would be, we would have, off-peak, megawatts of 156. And so that's starting to get pretty interesting to us. And so one thing that we're looking at, could we manage that and get that down? And what I say by managing, managing in the home, there's going to be a couple things that are going to, be taking place. We'll have battery storage that can go to reduce the peak loads on the corridor. And then we also can have time of use and DSM in the garage. And that's what our, demand side management in the garage. So we think we could, really limit that down to, we could get the hundreds of megawatts down to something closer to 20 megawatts and really manage that. So the moral of that story is that as we start looking into this, if we could, work with the regulators and get different rates in place and have different structures and also put some battery storage on the corridor, we could probably really manage this load to be a pretty small portion of, of this 1100 megawatts that we have on our system. So that's kind of how we're thinking about the system impacts and what all, how we attempt to manage that and make this as painless for the, for the system and the customers of Montana as possible. So I guess with that is, I'll just skip over this. I don't want to take too much time and allow for questions. But what this is showing is that the more an EV charging station is utilized, the lower the cost per kilowatt hour to fill that battery. So if you look back to when Tesla first started doing this, Tesla was getting bills from us for up to $1.80 a kilowatt hour. So to put that into terms of, what I've been talking about, our rate in our garage is 12 cents a kilowatt hour. So, that was 15 times. Tesla was paying us 15 times what, you would pay from your garage. But as the usage has increased, that's really pushed down the cost per kilowatt hour. And we kind of expect that to continue to occur. But I think the net to all this is it looks like it's about 35 to 40 cents a kilowatt hour, even if a station's utilized pretty heavily. So, Electrify America and some other groups have billing, billing systems set up, and they're about 35 to 40 cents. And so that 35 to 40 cents looks like about the right retail rate to be charging to customers along the corridor. So that's what that chart's supposed to be telling you. And then with that, I'll morph into how are we looking at this. So, I talked about EV means a lot of different things to a lot of people. And so we've set up teams internally to be looking at, how are we going to attack EV? And so we kind of come up with, we think there's kind of 5 verticals to look at, or kind of 5 swim lanes. We've talked a lot about the DC fast charging, which is this fifth, the fifth one over here. I don't know if my cursor's pointing at that, but the right-hand side's the DC. That's the corridor. That's near and present to us. There's federal policy to try to get, that infrastructure built out. And so that's why there's a lot of activity around that. But that pricing and that impact to the system is quite a bit different than, say, residential charging, where people can come in their homes and just charge, from midnight to 6 a.m. And that impact to our system is much more mitigated by doing that. And you can buy much less expensive charging devices to get that done for the consumer. So, when we talk about the corridor, we're talking about charging stations that cost, $100,000 to $200,000 each. But if you can put Clipper Creek, charging in your home for $250, that's a much different, cost structure and capital outlay, to get the charging completed. But it also, they're charging at much different times of the day and have a much different impact to the system. The DC fast charging hits you right now, and we don't know when it's going to be. Over on the residential, that can be, really mitigated by charging between 6 a.m. and or midnight and 6 a.m. And then, multifamily charging at apartments is going to be quite a bit different than a single family dwelling where you have a garage. And so that'll also be a different setup with different CapEx and those kinds of things. And then, then there's also fleet charging where, we know pizza delivery companies and, a lot of companies, a lot of commercial companies have, carbon reduction goals that they have to meet themselves. So they're looking at their own ways of doing business that are different than what they used to be. So as we look at bus charging, these scooters and things like that you see and that are emerging in some of our towns now, fleet charging, that's just much different than residential charging. And so there's different work streams, different capital plans, different business models to try to make that work. And then finally, I'll talk about, if you go to Starbucks or a parking garage like we're talking, what does that look like? Because that's different than fleet as well. So the moral of that story is that there's different work streams, there's different cost allocations. There's different business models for each one of those. We're working on all of those right now. We don't have, a plan that we're rolling out to the public to say, here's what we're doing on each one of those yet, but we're working on that, and we're going to get that out as soon as really practical for us. And so there'll be more to come from us on that, but each of these activities is quite a bit different. And then each of these have different operational or ownership models that we could use, So our number one is our traditional model. That traditional model says we set up all the distribution, we get right to the meter, and we hand it off to somebody else. So, and that's how we set up Teslas. So Tesla owns all of this stuff, the premise wiring, the chargers, how they bill the customers, or if they choose to bill the customers at all, they handle all of this. A lot of companies that we're talking to really don't want to do all this stuff here. So they're asking us to look at different ways that we could help them out and get charging on their sites. And so, we have a whole different host of models here. We could do all the wiring, but let them handle the EV charging and the interaction with the driver. We could take all of it, and do that for them. So there's just different ways of looking at this. So we look at the number one is our business as usual model. We stop at the meter, and then we have just a number of different ways that we can do it from that point on. And candidly, I think a lot of the customers are going to, want us to operate somewhere between 2 and 6, and it's going to be different with each one. So we're building out, profit and loss models for each one of these to see what the right way to handle this is, what the right billing to the customer should be, and how we should handle it. Again, we don't have that done, but this is how we're looking at it. And what I want to impress upon people is EV isn't just a word you can say, here's our EV strategy. EV's got it depends which part of the food chain you're in and which part, which customer you're solving their solutions for. It's going to be different for each one of these, and that's, we're looking at it differently and running numbers, and we'll come back, with an offering for, some or all of these. So I guess the way to boil it down, what are the challenges and opportunities for us? Obviously the opportunities are, more revenue that, don't go to, that would have gone to oil companies now is going to go into the electric sector. And, how can we do this to keep everybody's costs down and allocate and leverage all of our assets across our system the best way possible to make this, the cost effective for all customers, not just some. And, that third bullet point is what I do want to impress upon, because, on the corridor, if we manage the peaks versus just let the peaks happen, I had a slide on that. The difference on that's hundreds of megawatts to 15 or 20 megawatts. And so, an effective use of batteries and things like that could really help leverage our system, both from the existing customers and these new customers coming on, to make this as cost effective for everybody as possible. So we haven't done a lot of storage up until now because it hasn't been cost effective. But looking at this, it looks like storage is a way to really, peak shave, keep these, keep the need down to buy more energy, keep the need down to put more, infrastructure in place, so we can really mitigate it if we get smart, on the other side of that meter, and help reduce these peak demand charges. Some challenges that we're going to face is, there's going to be a lot of EV people coming into this, and so, if it's argued that we're, if we put this in rate base that's unfair to the private sector, well then, companies like Tesla didn't wait around for us. They went ahead and did this themselves. They might not wait for the utility sector, to figure this out, and they'll just do it themselves. And my guess is, or at least my hypothesis is, when you don't have other assets you can leverage, the cost on the corridor, if private enterprise puts this in, is going to be much higher per kilowatt hour when you're driving around on vacation and things like that than it would have been, if we could use a company to leverage their current assets to keep some of those costs down. I guess with that, Joel, I'll just stop and take comments and questions and things like that, and we'll go from here.
All right, well, thanks for getting us started. You definitely generated some questions.
Okay.
So let's start with the first one is, would you also talk about how utility companies plan to deal with demand charges for these direct charging fast stations?
Yeah, the demand charge is what's really going to drive the customers crazy. Where is that chart I had on the Tesla ones? I mean, right here. I mean, if you don't know if your average cost per kilowatt's going to be 40 cents a kilowatt hour that month or $1.80, that's a hard way to run your business. So we recognize that demand charges are definitely a key part of what we need to control here. And that's where I kind of talked about the battery and things like that as a way to really mitigate that. So at home and things like that, we have pretty predicted patterns, but on the road, we just don't know when 5 cars are going to show up somewhere and plug in. So I think we're going to have to really to mitigate these. We're aware of this. We want to mitigate this. I think we're going to have to deploy things like energy storage and things like that to really keep these demand charges down. And probably, I mean, I don't know this, but what I think is going to happen is we're going to just have to come up with an EV rate that's going to blend the demand charge and the usage charge. So these if you're a commercial enterprise that wants to have an offering for their customers and you want to bill them for it, you're just going to have to know what your cost from us is going to be. So I think we're going to morph into a more blended rate that's just going to be the EV rate is X. And if I had to guess, it's going to be somewhere around 40 cents. Don't hold me to that because we're still doing numbers on that. But, if we come with a rate that's different than that, it certainly probably will be. But, Electrify America has these out there. They're charging about 40 cents. That feels like about the right number. That will also include demand charges. So we're aware of it. We understand it. It's a problem, and it's something we need to address here pretty quickly.
All right, and I'll just, this I think is a very related question, and this slide's the perfect one to be on. First part is, did Tesla pay for the installation of their own charges? And then why is this cost per kilowatt hour going down so quickly for the Tesla stations here?
Yeah, Tesla did pay all the upfront costs, everything. So if you look at this model, all we did was we just went to the meter here. So we did what we normally do. We just we set it all up for them. We made sure that we had power in the area that could handle the demand that we saw coming. And so that's how we set that up. They covered all those costs. I don't know if Toyota and Chevrolet and all these are going to do the same thing because that had to be very, very expensive for Tesla to roll that program out. So that's the answer to the first part of it. The second answer is the reason that was so much higher is the way our demand charge works. If only one car drove up that month, there would be a demand charge the minute they plugged in, and let's say they filled their battery to 50 kilowatt hours and then drove off. Well, the demand charge is going to be for the whole month, the highest 15 minutes for the month. And so if there's no more volume after that, there's nothing to smooth that down. So what happens is the demand charge will come and pop a couple of times, and then that's going to stay for the whole month. And then from that point on, as the usage is occurs, it increases the denominator in the bill. And so our commercial billing to them, I think, is 11 cents, maybe it's 12 cents a kilowatt hour. So once the demand charge hit, and then they were only being billed at 12 cents a kilowatt hour after that, that smoothed those costs down. And so really it's just a function of how much volume there is. And the volume that we're seeing is increasing dramatically, and that's what's reducing it for Tesla.
All right, that makes a lot of sense to me. All right, let's go to the next one here. On your map, you had a charger at Gardner, Montana. Do you know if it's set up for CCS, CADE MO, and or Tesla charging?
Well, yeah, it is set up. It's a Tesla charging station, so it's a Tesla one. So so you got to have the Tesla, and Tesla has their own plug-in, and then they also have. Sorry. Then they
Sorry,
also have.
I'll talk about it when we get to our
Okay,
presentation.
got it. Okay, got it. Okay, got it. I'll go to the next question then, Joel.
Okay, so Neal will come back and add a little more to that as well. So we do have one more question, I think, before we'll kind of move on, and that is, and it's a little broader one, and there's actually, I'm going to take 3 questions and make them one here, but Northwest Energy has a lot of coal, natural gas, and hydropower assets in terms of your generation. We've heard climate change as part of the reason people are considering electric vehicles. How does bringing electric vehicles onto your network help or maybe hinder your ability to maybe have wind, solar, hydro, or some of the other maybe lower carbon energy sources?
Yeah, so that is a pretty comprehensive question there. So on the one hand, so as cars drive up, we're going to have to try to figure out how we're going to have the capacity to deal with what could be occurring on the corridor. And so, capacity then tells you that, well, now you can't have wind and solar because, if the capacity occurs at 11 o'clock at night, solar's not going to help you. If it happens to happen on a day with no wind, the wind's not going to help you. So, it does fit into our overall supply needs. So I'm on this chart, I'm showing our peak load at 1100 megawatts. Our average load's about 700 megawatts, give or take. Well, it's in the 10K. So if I'm off a little bit, whatever the 10K says is right. But it's less than that. And it's a little more than half of the peak load. So we engineer our supply around that. So what it gets to is you can see we really need to manage. Where to have that slide? We really need to manage these peaks, and we can do that with batteries and things like that. So I think we haven't had a lot of batteries that we've thought about in our distribution system in the past. This could be an introduction to to bring those in, because managing this load versus just letting it happen is 2 different answers, as you can see from this chart. So the impacts or the ramifications of being able to manage it are pretty dramatic and significant. So it does kind of call for ways to do that. Batteries could come into place to help it. If there's other storage that we can deploy over the next decade here, because there's just a lot of change going on in the sector right now. So whatever happens on May 6th of 2022 will be much different than what happens on May 6th of 2032. So there'll be some probably technological changes, that we're not contemplating here. But clearly what it shows is being able to manage the peak is really going to mitigate all these kinds of things. And then, as you talk about, the transportation sector uses more carbon than the electric sector. So the electric sector has been, trying to make this change for the last 10 to 15 years. And it might not be moving as fast as people want, but it's reduced that carbon footprint significantly on our sector. So transportation is now the number one. And so if you can reduce it on transportation, and if we can get creative with our management then to reduce these peak loads, between the two, I think that we can really help sustainability for scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, all the way up and down the chain. So I think if we work together on this, we can probably make a pretty big difference.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Dan. We've got a few more questions, but I think we'll save those to the end so we can kind of stay on schedule. But I appreciate that. If you want to stop sharing, we'll transition that over to Mark here.
Okay. I think I stopped.
You did.
Okay, got it.
And Mark, you should have the ability to share now. So now let me introduce our second speaker here, which is Mark Hayden, who's the general manager of Missoula Electric. And Mark, I'm seeing your speaker notes. There we go. Perfect. With Northwestern Energy is obviously our larger investor owned, but we also have a whole network of rural electric cooperatives across the state that serve a lot of customers, especially outside of I hate to use the word urban because Montana doesn't have really any urban, but especially a lot of our smaller towns and rurals are serviced by a member-owned rural electric cooperative. So we asked Mark today to kind of talk a little bit about the perspective from rural electric cooperatives, and then specifically what Missoula Electric Cooperative is doing with respect to that. So Mark, I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Good morning, and thank you, Joel. Good morning, everyone. Yes, my name is Mark Hayden. I'm the general manager of Missoula Electric Cooperative, headquartered here in Missoula. And let's get started. So today I'm going to talk to you. Basically, first I want to give you an overview of Missoula Electric Cooperative. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the co-op and our service territory. And then I'm going to dive into some of the programs and projects that we have going today. First being the Fast Charge Your Ride grant that we were awarded in Sealy Lake, and that installation is ongoing right now. We also have a managed pilot program we've launched, and we're excited to get that rolling and gather data and determine our plans and processes going forward based upon that program. And then I'll pull back a little bit and talk about kind of a rural Montana co-op perspective, because there are 25 electric co-ops across Montana, each with different opportunities and challenges. So with that, talk a little bit about MEC. We are an electric co-op founded in 1938. We serve 6 counties in Montana, 1 in Idaho. And if you look at the screen, we serve up north of Connon, up the Sealy Swan Valley. We serve the I-90 corridor from Superior roughly out through Beaver Tail Hill, east of Missoula. We serve the Highway 12 corridor to Laxaw, basically in Idaho. We do not serve the city of Missoula. That's served by Northwestern Energy. So we do primarily serve the rural communities that surround Missoula. The co-op is governed by a 7-member democratically elected board, and that's an important aspect. We have members. Our governing body is living and working in the communities we serve, so it gives us great feedback to the needs of those communities. We have also 13,000 members, 16,000 meters. We have 39 employees that take care of that over the 2,000 miles of line. And we do serve some of the more rugged areas here in western Montana. So it does create a challenge from time to time. We serve that over 16 substations and 2 metering points. We do take delivery from Northwestern at most of those locations. From a utility perspective, though, I think we need to talk a little bit about our power supply, because that's really an important aspect. We are all requirements contract customers of Bonneville Power. And, that power supply I consider, and I like to tell my members as often as I can, that I think we are beneficiaries of the greatest power system in the world, probably, the Federal Columbia River Power System. The port we receive from Bonneville is approximately 85% hydro, 10% nuclear, and 5% a mix of wind and other non-designated resources. They bill us, though, in what's called a tiered rate system. So our share of the federal hydropower system and the nuclear system is fixed. We get an allocation based upon our share of load in the region. That's marketed to us at what's called Tier 1. That is our slice of that federal system, which is 95% carbon free each and every day. When our loads grow above that, which they have, we then are into what's called Tier 2, and Bonneville makes market purchases on our behalf when we hit that Tier 2 level. And so that is those market purchases when loads grow, when loads peak, and I'll be talking about that a lot, because our focus when it comes to EV deployment and the impacts on our system as we move forward. We do have 3 active community solar projects as well. Our members are able to participate in those. We have 1 in Lolo, 1 in Frenchtown, and 1 on the Kettle House Brewery in Bonner. And those have been tremendously positive installations for us, and our members are able to participate in that. Dan mentioned storage projects. We're installing or actively working on an installation of a storage project west of town, and that will tie into our EV program as we move forward. So let's talk about system loading, because it's all about peaks, right? The demand is driving our costs during certain times of the day, and as we move into this more and more deployment of EV, that is our focus. If you look at our, you know, at night through the middle of the day, we get these valleys, but our peaks always occur. And maybe Northwestern is the same, but I could predict that our peaks every day will occur between 7 a.m. and 10 a.m. or 6 p.m. and 9 p.m. This is driving our decision making, but the good news is, you know, we have time to develop programs to address that as EVs are more widely deployed. I mentioned this as well because we are transitioning to a time of use rate later this summer. It's a revenue neutral time of use rate. We don't need more money. We want to be more equitable in the way we charge our members. We're going to be lowering our kilowatt hour charge for all hours off peak, and we're going to be implementing a small time of use demand charge for on peak hours. It's more equitable to our members and it's cost to those that are driving cost. And we're looking forward to implementing that on July 1. So that's an important aspect. If we take a look at our current EV projects here at MEC, we don't have any DC fast chargers on our system at this time, but that's going to change here in the coming weeks. MEC is really not interested in being in the business of high-speed charging, but we are interested in promoting and supporting the communities we serve. We are owned by those we serve, and thus our focus is on commitment to the communities, cooperative principles that govern us, and that is number 7 is concern for community. As part of the DC, the Fast Charge Your Ride program, the Volkswagen funding opportunity that came about was identified as a destination location along the Highway 93 corridor between Glacier and Missoula. For MEC, that was an opportunity for us to maintain and make sure that the Sealy Lake community remains relevant going forward. Highway 93 through Polson, you know, that is going to be designated or is designated a corridor. But we wanted to make sure those people traveling to Glacier, Highway 83, had the ability to charge on their way. And so we applied for the DC fast charging grant through Fast Charge Your Ride. So when picking a site for our DC fast charger in Sealy Lake, it was important to us that we support the community, but not necessarily one particular business in that community. For that reason, we looked around and tried to identify businesses and organizations that were community focused and community based. We own property. We have an office in Sealy Lake, but that's not near the business center of the community. So we approached the Sealy Lake Community Foundation. They have a beautiful office right there in Sealy Lake, and they were a very willing partner. Sealy Lake Community Foundation is community-based, and their mission and values are consistent with ours, and they are super supportive. Installation is it began this week. Actually, we installed our infrastructure, and we have all the equipment to get that charger installed over the coming few weeks. I mentioned the Fast Charge Your Ride grant. It's a 50 kW DC fast charger that's going to be installed, 140 to 180 miles of range per hour, depending upon the vehicle. Partnered with that will be 2 level 2 chargers, 15.5 kW charge capability total, and a couple pictures of them there. I do want to talk a little bit about the equipment that we chose. Zeph Energy is an equipment manufacturer, equipment distributor that works closely with electric cooperatives throughout the nation. If you've ever traveled through the Midwest, charge, and that unit that's going to be installed in Sealy Lake, as I mentioned, is a 50 kW charger, level 3 charger with a backup 15.5. But we are installing a Zeph mini sub that's capable of supporting up to 150 kW for expansion in the future as as demand for that charging station continues to grow as we move forward. Another goal of is to obtain as much data as possible. Dan mentioned, this need to gather data, and that's truly our reason beyond the economic support of that community. We need to understand the effects of rapid charging on our system. Now, 50 kW isn't, for 150 kW charging stations like are being proposed under the infrastructure plans, but it is something that's important to determine more importantly the frequency of usage and when people are charging and when those peak demand periods are going to be. We also want to avoid competing with those businesses, those entities that want to make charging part of their business model. We're not here to compete with our members, and this was our opportunity. We were the only ones to apply for a DC fast charging grant in Sealy Lake, so it made good sense for us to do it at that time. And then also, this will allow us, based upon demand impacts, to create rate structures that collect the cost without causing cross-subsidization in our membership. And that's the last thing we want to do as we move forward with these across our territory. Like I said, DC fast charging, roadside charging is not our focus. It's an important part of our future, but where we are really focusing our attention is on managed residential charging. If you look at the screen, the Bonneville Environmental Foundation conducted a study called EV Cost, Benefits and Studies Summary, and it looked at the benefits of EV charging in the Pacific Northwest and compared that to unmanaged to managed charging in our region. A summary, executive summary slide shows that, the potential impact over the next 10 years of each electric vehicle utility like MEC is $300 to $800 in a unmanaged charging situation. So basically that's the difference between the revenue generated under current rates compared to the cost. So $300 to $800. If we can leverage managed charging with our members, we can increase that to an average of $830 to $1,000. And that means we can pass that savings directly back to the members we serve. And as a co-op we operate, our bottom line goes back to our members. So if we can encourage our members to participate in a managed charging solution, it's going to benefit the co-op and the members we serve. Our residential EV charging presents the largest opportunities and the largest potential challenges, quite honestly, for rural electric co-ops across the state. We have just under 13,000 members. If every one of those members had a 7.7 kW charger promoting in their garage, that would be a tremendous impact on our system peak if they all came on when they pulled in the garage at night coming home from work. Accommodating large amounts of charging will require us to move that load and leverage the 9 hours of off-peak for overnight charging. And that's what we're attempting to do with this managed charging pilot. So we're currently testing this pilot, have one system in operation with a full pilot launch in July. And as Dan mentioned as well, we are seeing some supply chain constraints. We do have 25 hitting our warehouse in the coming 2 weeks, but we did get one. We were able to test it and put it through its paces, and I'm going to show you some of the data we're gathering from that unit. But once we have these 100 in place, it will allow us to integrate these chargers into our managed or metered system, because all the data is going to come back to the system we currently use from our metering system. It will allow us to integrate it into our billing system so we can bill it properly and not have to manually enter any readings. It will interface without that manual intervention. We also have managed website and an app that our members use for their billing data, account data. These will integrate seamlessly with that app as well. Managed charging also means we can offer rate discounts because we can control when this thing runs and basically move the load off of our peak. Participating members will use a charger that's provided. It's a Clipper Creek charger, but it's branded and there are some components, primarily communication components, that ZEP installs, a 7.7 amp level 2 charger. It has built-in revenue grade metering that we can access via cell phone, Wi-Fi, or hopefully via power line carrier, the same as our current metering system today. The units allow lockout to prevent on-peak charging, and members can choose to override that if they wish. And members, will likely have a monthly fee for the unit, and the cooperative will retain ownership. For that vary across the nation. Some sell these things outright to their members. Some charge a monthly fee for the unit plus an energy charge, and some just charge a monthly flat fee, $50 a month for all the energy you want, as long as you don't run on peak. We haven't decided yet how we're going to do that, but it's likely going to be a monthly fee with a reduced energy rate off peak and a peak charge if they do choose and need through our peak. So what's in it for the member? Well, savings. Participants will receive a reduced kilowatt hour charge for all charges taking place during off-peak hours. Again, that rate will be set and it will be something less than our straight residential rate for the benefit of us being able to control that load. They will also avoid those KW charges that we are implementing for their regular load that's attributable to charging, as long as it does take place. And for most users, it will be an increase in speed. They provide twice the range in the same amount of time as the free 120 volt chargers that many people use today. What's in it for the co-op? Demand management. That's the bottom line. The value of the program will be shifting demand intensive load off of our system peak, and for that we can give them a discount, a rebate. Another important piece of information and benefit for the co-op is this cloud-based platform that we have, knowing the charging durations, knowing the number of sessions, building this data so we understand as EVs are more fully deployed that impact on our instantaneous peak. And then trends. Today we have a bit of an idea of which members have, but this will help us understand the pace of adoption so we can plan accordingly for future capacity concerns that we have. So what is it? How quickly will a 7.7 kW charging unit, if a battery is at 20% or 12 to 20 kilowatt hours, to move that up 48 to 80 kilowatt hours would take 60 kilowatt hours and 5 to 8 hours of time. Plenty of time if we move it off peak, charge over the evening hours, and the person is ready to go in the morning. For information, 36 to 60 kilowatt hours corresponds to 140 to 200 miles of driving. So for many, this could represent a week's worth of commuting if they live close to town. So what does our member see? Screenshot of the app that we have. As you can see from the center tile, this member of ours has a Mustang Mach-E. The serial number of the charger is in the first tile. Every one of these is serialized so we can keep them separate in our billing system. They're ready to start charging, as you can see in the center. And the tile on the right shows that we have two on-peak from 7 to 10 in the morning, from 6 to 9 at night, and they can override either of those time periods by just clicking the override button and charging through the peak if they need to. They pay full retail and a higher KW charge if they make that choice. What is the co-op? See, this is where we're starting to gather data. This is a screenshot of the communication get. It's a cell-based system today. We have 90% COM reliability. As I told you, we have a very diverse, a very rugged system. Cell phone communication is not going to work in all cases. We're going to need Wi-Fi. We're going to need power line return capabilities, but this first one's out near Frenchtown. So fairly reliable cell phone communication, signal strength, the daily average kilowatt hours, 23.92. Installed this test, they have used 784.34 kilowatt hours. This just gives a snapshot of the energy usage by time of day. 2 kilowatt hours early after midnight. This is one day. I didn't write this, but it says the amount of kilowatt hours burnt. I would use a different term than burnt. I might use consumed if I was creating, but they have burned anywhere from 2 to 3.5 kilowatt hours per hour with the system. Next slide shows capacity, the demand on the system at any given time. I told you it's a 7.7 kW system, and from 9 to 9:30 a.m., 10:30 to 2, you can see when this system's running, and this will allow us to stack this data as we get more of them and see what kind of impact on our system directly. So challenges and opportunities. Well, of course, the challenges are increased kilowatt hour sales during the overnight hours when our usage is at its lowest. We can move this load and take advantage of that when capacity is plentiful or in the overnight hours. Another opportunity is this increased relevance with our members. I told you that we're here to serve our members. With our robust energy efficiency and conservation programs. We serve them with our propane service. This is just another way to connect with our members and maintain our relevance with them as they transfer from carbon-based oil and gas power vehicles to electric. Some of the challenges is not all electric service will support 2 of these, and many of our members will have 2 as time progresses, and we'll need to visit some of these services, some of these rural services that were built decades ago may only have a 15 kVA residential transformer. That may not be enough. And finally, not all members are going to choose to participate. We don't expect everyone to choose to participate. Tesla drivers are likely not going to. If you own a Ford F-150, this is probably not the charger for you. But our next steps will be to reach out to our business members and work to power their fleet charging, this managed charging program rather than one they buy off the shelf. If we switch gears a little bit and talk about EV infrastructure in rural Montana. This is a map of Montana's rural electric co-ops. We serve all 56 counties. There are 25 of us in the state. And as you can see, there are a lot of territory in eastern Montana that are served. That's the core of co-op country. Each co-op is different. Some of us have very small staff sizes. And so to implement these programs in-house is going to be a challenge for some because of staff sizing. This takes staff for cybersecurity. It takes staff for maintenance of the system and implementation and communication with our members. So a managed charging program is going to be the right fit for everyone, but each of them has the desire, of course, to make sure that their territory is covered when it comes to EV charging, especially roadside charging in the future. If we talk about that, in 2019, motorists drove 3.276 billion miles on Montana's 3 interstate highways. If the average uses 20.27 to 0.36 kilowatt hours per mile, to replace every one of those miles, 885 million to 1.18 billion kilowatt hours annually. I know that's being addressed through the funding opportunities in the infrastructure bill, and Dan talked about that briefly. And we have a panel set up of electric co-op leaders across the state of Montana that are talking about that in their specific areas. You know, just some concerns, and I know Neal's going to talk about this in his presentation in a little bit, but corridor selection is going to be big on our radar screen, making sure our rural communities are not left behind. The broad swath of territories in central Montana, we need to make sure that corridors are maintained or developed in those areas. And there's an argument the interstate system is developing already, and that will happen naturally, but it will be more challenging to bring high-speed charging to rural Montana and making, you know, once those corridors are built out, how are we going to then develop those connecting large areas in central Montana? So that's one of our concerns. Distribution infrastructure as well. Has long feeders, single phase lines in some cases, and some of these grant requirements of 150 kW charging stations is probably not a necessity or a possibility every 50 miles. And so maybe a better step would be to put in smaller chargers like our 50 kW charging station in Sealy Lake, and at least there will be options and the ability to cross rural Montana and get to a high-speed charging station on the interstate. There's also been a lot of questions. I've been asked about the collection of road taxes, and it's been raised a number of times. For me, roadside charging, there's the possibility that makes sense, that at those charging stations that road taxes could be collected. But when it comes to in-home charging, there's no way we're going to know who's charging with our charger, who's plugging into the wall. We don't know those loads. We don't want to know those loads. Our members are concerned about privacy, and they will just plug into the wall, go to Home Depot and buy a charger. So that is not going to be an effective way. So I think we need to look through vehicle registration or some other means of collecting those road tax, but that's a question frequently. My last slide, I do want to invite everyone to a future event that's going to really dive into these topics more, and that's called Electrify the Big Sky. We're planning this event with the Montana Electric Cooperatives Association, DEQ, and an entity called Electrify the Big Sky. It's going to happen on September 13th, a one-day educational conference, and it's going to dive into, you know, this whole concept of beneficial. There are opportunities, but there are also going to be challenges, and we've touched on some of them today when it comes to the utility perspective and how we plan for this going forward. I like to call it more strategic electrification and how we plan for it accordingly. We're going to have electric vehicle vendors. We're going to have policymakers and utilities. I know Northwestern's on the panels as well. I encourage you to electrifythebigsky.com for more information and to register. We're hoping to fill the room at the University of Montana on September 13th. So with that, I will open it up for questions.
All right, well, thanks, Mark. Yeah, I've got 3 questions so far for you. The first one is, what's the size of the typical home meter on your system? And do you expect that those would need to be upgraded if people put in some of these more higher speed charging at their home?
The question was the size of the meter?
Yeah, is that going to be a limiting factor, I think, for somebody to charge at home?
Well, you know, as I mentioned, the size of most people have a 200 amp service at their home, but that's not necessarily true. They may need to upgrade the size of their service depending upon the charger that they put in the home. I would think the numbers I'm hearing, and I'm not the expert on this, but if 50, you know, that's going to be a higher speed charger. A 7.7 kW charger that we're proposing is not going to be a problem for most folks. So just depends on the level of charger that they choose.
All right. So the other comment came in pretty early in your presentation was you had mentioned that your allocation of federal power was limited based on your share of, I think, the regional delivery network. If your overall demand grows on your system, how do you get access to additional power sources?
Yeah, so that gets back to what's called the tier 2. There are a variety of ways we can accomplish that. We can go out on our own and market or look for market purchases of power. But Bonneville is our all requirements provider, and we contract with Bonneville. They take care of 100% of our system needs, no matter what they are. We've done that for the life of our contract, which began in 2011, and we are committed to doing that through 2028 and beyond.
Right. All right. So the last one I've got so far is, do you have other types of electrical users that have different rates for different times of day, like you're proposing with the electric vehicle charging?
So we have always had, we call it a peak charge on the residential side, so that of use peak. We have always had demand charges for commercial and industrial loads. If you think about it, the residential rate has always had demand. It's just been baked into the overall rate, a two-part rate. We're not charging anything new. We are just charging it differently. So the demand rate, which we're calling peak just to differentiate it from time of use, is new, a new rate component, but other rate structures, other rate classes have had that forever. Yes.
All right. So the last one that just came in, and it says, just to clarify, Missoula Electric owns no actual electricity generation. They're a customer for all their electricity generation.
That is true, other than the community solar arrays that I discussed earlier. Correct.
Okay. All right. Well, I think that's got us through all the questions so far. If you're willing to hang around after Neal, we'll bring you back as a panelist. So thanks, Mark. And let me get the presentation rights over to Neal. All right, so our next speaker, Neal Ullman, who I think some of you, he snuck in as an extra speaker last session to add a little bit of depth to one of the topics there. So Neal's with the Montana Department of Environmental Quality. Neal's going to talk some more about the electric vehicle infrastructure, especially on the national level, and how the program is working and what that means here in Montana. So with that, Neal, I will turn it over to you.
Thanks, Joel. Does everything look okay?
Everything looks great.
Good. Well, thank you, Joel. Thank you, Mark and Dan. For anybody who knows me, the information that was just shared by Mark and Dan, I've been aware of some of it in conversations with them, but hearing more details and getting more specifics, for me, it's like Christmas. I mean, this is with some nice weather outside. I'm just pleased as punch. It's Friday. So this is all very, very cool information, and I'm going to try and supplement it with some of the work that we're doing here at the Energy Office at Montana DEQ. Just blowing through this real quick, and also just to clarify on, the different levels of chargers that are going to be at places like the Cedar Lake Community Foundation, at the town pumps and things of that nature. The level 2 chargers that are also the chargers that are at home. For some plug-in hybrid electric vehicles like your Chevy Volt, which is an electric motor with a gasoline backup, they can only do those level 2 chargers. They cannot accept a DC fast charge. And so making sure that any Montanan or tourist that is driving one of these plug-in hybrid electrics can also use these charging locations that were funded with the state's portion of the Volkswagen diesel emissions settlement is something that we want to make sure the folks had access to. But primarily speaking, we're talking about battery electric, all electric vehicles that can use both the level 2 chargers that, as Mark said, would take about 6 to 8 hours, depending on your vehicle, depending on your charging capacity to fully charge. But then they can also accept these DC fast chargers. So primarily we're talking about Chevy Bolts, the all-electric Chevy, Ford F-150 Lightnings, and others. There's also a lot of different things with plugs that kind of come into play. And any vehicle will be able to, any electric or plug-in hybrid electric vehicle can use the J1772 plug for level 2 charging. But then when you get into DC fast charging, Tesla has its own proprietary plug. They have an adapter to be able to use the CHAdeMO plug, but there is no adapter for using the Tesla superchargers. So I'm not going to be really talking about the superchargers a whole lot this morning. But what I am going to be talking about is the CCS combo plug, and that'll come into play when we're talking about the chargers that are going into town pumps and the Sea Lake Community Foundation and Gardner, as well as the federal bipartisan infrastructure law funding that I'm going to get into in a moment. So for charging, fast charging infrastructure in Montana, this is what we have now and what we're looking for in the near future. The green dots represent fast charging locations that were that are online. This needs to be updated a little bit, but we're funded through our Volkswagen settlement dollars. So we funded DC fast chargers similar to the one that Mark showed you at the existing Taco Bell in Polson, a new Taco Bell just off the Highway 93 North exit in Y, just outside of Missoula. Then also the new Audi Bozeman dealership off the Main Street exit on the frontage road. The black dots, 3 of the black dots anyway, the one in Missoula at the Walmart on Reserve, the one at the Flying J in Rocker just outside of Butte, and the one at the Dell Market are all Electrify America stations. And when I get into the bipartisan infrastructure law funding, if any of you have driven by or seen any of those Electrify America stations, those are the types of locations essentially that we'll be funding through the bipartisan infrastructure law, and I'll get into more detail on that. Town Pump also on its own volition, without any grant money, just because they are kind of reading the writing on the wall. They have built a new travel plaza just south of Whitefish, and they installed 4 charge point chargers at that new travel plaza, and that is online. For the rest of the dots, the gray dots, those are all in progress, including the Sea Lake one, which construction is going to start, sounds like from Mark, in the next week or couple. On the Gardner location, which we talked about very briefly, and I apologize for interrupting Dan, that location just came online in the last couple of days. The installation happened a couple of months ago, but getting the software up and running proved a little bit more challenging than expected. That was also funded in part by the Volkswagen settlement dollars, the fast charger ride that Mark was talking about. And that is at a new Sinclair gas station travel plaza just outside of Gardner. That's also, it's going to be cool, especially during peak tourism season. They'll have food trucks there. They have a travel plaza, and they'll also have this, they'll have a level 2 charger as well as a DC fast charger. And that literally just came online this last couple of days. And so, covering that north entrance of Yellowstone National Park is going to be a really exciting opportunity for electric vehicle tourists, both from Montana as well as out-of-state tourists. The rest of the gray dots, Dan mentioned 9 locations that Northwestern Energy got funded through our Fast Charge Your Ride program. Those are primarily along the interstate locations, as well as Hamilton down Highway 93. We also gave money directly to Town Pump for 3 other locations, Eureka, Libya, and Kalispell, at the existing Town Pumps in those communities. So once those chargers are delivered, global supply chain issues continue to be a challenge. But once those come online, it's going to be really different in terms of the electric vehicle driving experience across the state of Montana. What this map does not include, obviously, the fact that the Gardner location is online. It does not include the 13 Tesla supercharger locations across the state. Some of those are within Northwestern service territory. Some of those are in CoOp country. So I didn't include those because with the funding that we have both through Volkswagen as well as through the bipartisan infrastructure law, that proprietary plug that is not available to non-Tesla drivers is not an eligible expenditure. So I didn't include those. Also, I mentioned the Town Pump location in Whitefish that they did on their own. They're also doing the same thing in Boulder and at a new location off the Zoo Drive exit in Billings. They're rebuilding, redesigning their Boulder location. I drove past there a couple months ago and they were still putting the walls up. So I assume that things are much further along now. The Billings location, I think, is ironically going through some DEQ comment period. I don't know anything about it, but anyway, that'll be online. That's something Town Pump is doing by themselves. The other location that's not included in here is I mentioned those 3 Electrify America locations in Missoula, Rocker, and Dell. They also announced within the last month on their website map that they're all going to be putting in a new location at Target in Billings, the existing Target just off of I-90. So that's an exciting development too. If we have this webinar series again, Joel, a year from now, this map is going to look significantly different, and it's going to be very exciting to talk about. So part of the reason why things will be different is that the bipartisan infrastructure law that was passed by Congress, signed by the president late last year, includes a pot of money for what's called the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure, NEVI, formula program, total of $5 billion total. Again, based off of a formula based on population, total highway miles in a given state. Montana is going to receive approximately $43 million over 5 years. Our initial allocation for the first year is $6.3 million. So we're going to be getting that in chunks over the life of the bipartisan infrastructure law. The goal is to create a nationwide network of fast charging locations across the country, with a focus on, to Mark's comment a few minutes ago, on rural areas and underserved communities, looking at where those investments like Electrify America, for example, they're already doing it at Walmarts and at existing travel plazas and Targets in higher populated areas. There'll be an exception, of course, but you look at Butte, Missoula, Billings, the goal of the NEVI program is to fill out those gaps, to fill out places like locations within those major communities. So I'm going to be talking about the formula program. There's also going to be a community grant program that'll be a discretionary allocation from the U.S. Department of Transportation. We really don't know anything about it other than it's a total of $2.5 billion. I think sometime before the end of the calendar year, before the end of 2022, we'll know more about it. The timeline is we received an initial set of guidance from the Federal Highway Administration on February 10th, and I'll get into some of what that guidance talked about and that Mark touched on a little bit. We're also expecting a second round of guidance a week from today on Friday the 13th. It'll give us some more details that in terms of eligible costs and what kinds of things we need to be considering as we develop the state plan on how we're going to be spending that money. That state plan needs to be submitted to the Federal Highway Administration by August 1st and should be approved by or before September 30th. Once those state plans are approved, then we can start doing the fun stuff of accepting applications, looking at proposals, getting money out the door, and getting projects started. If you go to our website, and I'll show that website URL in a moment, we had a webinar on April 4th, just over a month ago, to kind of kick off our public comment process and give some background on the NEVI program. So go to the website. You can listen to me yammer on even more about this funding opportunity, and also the first opportunity that we had to listen to Montanans on how the state plan should reflect the goals and vision for a Montana electric vehicle fast charging network. We also currently have open on that website that I'll share in a moment, a public survey that we're doing through SurveyMonkey. We need to hear from Montana on what your thoughts are, what the priorities of the plan should include in order to put together our plan, because we don't want to be putting in ourselves in a closed room. We want to be doing it with the input and the ideas that Montanans have. We've been doing direct stakeholder outreach to electric utility providers, auto dealers, clean energy advocates, the people who also are installing this equipment, so electricians and other workers. And so we're going to be doing more of that. The public survey, though, is going to be open through June 30th. So after you have a chance to digest the information that we're talking about today, think about what a fast charging network should look like in Montana, then take some time to fill out that survey and provide us with some input on what we should be thinking about. I already covered all this. One of the sets of eligibility requirements that we do know about from the February 10th guidance is that over the last couple of years, MDT, the Montana Department of Transportation, and DEQ working together have submitted nominations to the Federal Highway Administration to designate alternative fuel corridors. So this is what we have so far. We have designated the entire lengths of I-15, I-90, I-94, Highway 2, and Highway 93 as alternative fuel corridors for electric vehicles. So with the NEVI funds, we can spend these monies to create fast charging locations within 1 travel mile of the exit off of these corridors. And those locations also, and I'll get to this again in a moment, need to be within a 1/4 mile walking distance of amenities. So there are communities on here just for reference, but looking at the corridors we've designated, there's a lot of work to do. And if you remember the map that I showed just a moment ago, for what's online in Montana right now for DC fast charging, the furthest east fast charging location is Gardner. And most of us do not think of east when we talk about Gardner. So we have a lot of work to do. There is a huge hole, a huge gap in north central and northeastern and the real eastern Montana. Luckily with Electrify America coming in Billings, that's going to be great. But we still need to make sure that folks traveling along either I-90 down south into Wyoming or I-94 over into North Dakota or Highway 2 into North Dakota have the opportunity to be able to travel out to those communities and experience the communities and the value that they have to be able to visit, especially during peak tourism seasons. Invest in local businesses and while you're charging up and be able to get out there. So in addition to the fast charger ride where we funded a bunch of communities and especially in Northwestern Montana, and then also along the key corridors in Great Falls and not Great Falls, I-15 and I-90, we need to continue to build that out. If you want to get more information about all the electric vehicle corridors in the US, you can go to the website down below. Drive Electric, make sure you put the 2 E's together. driveelectric.gov is the website for what was created by the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law for the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation, a joint effort through the U.S. Department of Energy and the U.S. Department of Transportation to be able to share resources, provide guidance, and provide education to states putting together the plans, but also to interested folks like are on this webinar today on what's available out there and what we'll be rolling out over the next months and years. Again, from what we know so far, is that each of these NEVI-funded fast charging locations need to have fast chargers that can provide up to a minimum, I should say, of 150 kilowatts of charge to a single vehicle. So Mark was talking about the Seeley Lake location. That will be able to provide a maximum of 50 kilowatts, so 1/3 of the capacity. Now, 50 kilowatts is still important for me. I'm still anticipating the arrival of my electric vehicle, but certainly as I go and visit relatives or go camping up in the Flathead or wherever it is I'm headed north out of Helena, that location will be key, and I will be happy to stop in Seeley Lake as I head up to Seeley Swan, and check out some local restaurants, stores, and whatnot, and fully charge up my vehicle as I keep on heading northwest, or vice versa. But 150 kilowatts is obviously significantly higher capacity. If you're pulling in to a fast charger with 150 kilowatts and you're around, let's say 5% state of charge, it would take you about 35-ish minutes to be able to get up to 85%, which would likely be more than enough for you to get to the next charging opportunity. I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, so these NEVI funds will be funding the CCS combo plug. The Chatamo plug, which was primarily an Asian car company charger or port, is kind of going the way of the dinosaur at this point. The Nissan Leafs primarily were using the Chatamo plug, but even Nissan is now moving over towards the CCS plug. And so we kind of see an industry shift towards that. Ford, Chevy, Volkswagen, Rivian, I think Toyota, they're all using the CCS combo plug. So again, it's going to be a 150 kilowatt capacity charger with a CCS combo plug. There should be 4 of these stations at each location. They can simultaneously charge at a minimum 150 kilowatts for electric vehicles. And that's kind of where this demand charge issue comes into play that Dan and Mark talked about. I'm not going to get into a whole lot of detail, but each of these locations then need to have at least 4 150 kilowatt capacity chargers with a CCS combo plug that can simultaneously charge 4 vehicles. They need to be available 24/7. As Mark alluded to, they should be no more than 50 miles apart. Now, this is a 5-year infrastructure law that was passed by Congress last year. And I mentioned that our initial allocation is $6.3 million. Back of the napkin calculations is that for each location that would have 4 chargers at 150 kilowatts, that 6.3 million, if we were to use all of that money, and there will of course be some administrative costs and potentially some other costs, you could fund around 5 to 7 of these locations with $6.3 million. And there's a whole bunch of caveats that come along with that. So I'll say 5 to 7. So 50 miles for now. We're not going to fill out a Montana charging network with $6.3 million in 1 year and be able to do them at 50-mile increments. So we're going to gradually build out a network that will hopefully include more of rural Montana than we have right now. I mentioned, the Golden Triangle, northeastern, eastern Montana. We will eventually get to the 50-mile thing, I think. But for now, we're going to have to kind of choose our priority communities. Again, within 1 travel mile of the designated corridors and within 1/4 mile of amenities. Amenities mean bathrooms, restaurants, stores, coffee shops, travel plazas, whatever you want to do or whatever you could do while you're waiting for your vehicle to charge up. What that does not mean, in all likelihood, is rest stops along interstates, federal rest stops. The issue is that, as Mark and Dan have already talked about, you're using a substantial amount of electricity through these DC fast chargers in order to charge up a vehicle. Even more so when you're talking about a single 150 kilowatt capacity charger, much less 4 of them at a single location. So you're probably going to want to be charging to charge at these locations. It would literally take an act of Congress in order to be able to do that type of commerce at an interstate stop area. It took an act of Congress in order to get vending machines there. So to try and get Congress to do something else on fast chargers would probably take a little bit of time. So you're probably not going to see them there. Plus, you also want to have more amenities than just the bathroom and letting your dog out to relieve itself as well. So putting these in local communities where, as you're waiting the 15 to 40-ish minutes for your vehicle to charge, you can also do other things. You can go to the bathroom, but you can also, drop some money into a local business, buy some trinkets as you're on vacation or whatever it is you're doing, grab a bite to eat. So hopefully within those amenities. These locations also need to achieve a near 100% reliability. You need to be able to pull into a location that's funded with these bipartisan infrastructure NEVI funds and have near certainty that the chargers are going to work. And these charging locations also need to stay in place and be open and operational for no less than 5 years after they come online. Like I said, we're going to get some more guidance next Friday. I'm not going to have answers for you next Friday afternoon because I'm still going to be digesting that information myself. So maybe hit me up in a week or 2 or 2 or 3 weeks, and we can talk more about what that guidance looks like. But for now, this is what we know. Like I said a moment ago, though, we first need to develop our state plan on what the state's vision and goals and priorities are going to be for this NEVI funding and how we're going to deploy the funds to get a statewide network. So that EV deployment plan is what we're working on right now. The Energy Office of DEQ is taking the lead with our partners at MDT. And we just need to hear from you, get ideas on what we should be thinking about along these corridors, and also certain specific communities that we should be thinking about prioritizing. Anyone can participate in it. Again, this public survey, so here's the link below that I was referencing earlier, deq.mt.gov/energy/fuels/fuels. Please fill out the survey. Encourage coworkers, colleagues, friends, family, whatever, to fill it out, because we need to be able to document that we heard from Montanans and that we took Montana input into consideration in developing that. You know, Mark mentioned, issues about cybersecurity, you know, how we're going to be implementing it as well. He mentioned that they're future proofing that location in Seeley Lake to be able to expand from a 50 kilowatt capacity charger to a 150 kilowatt capacity charger. That was the first I heard it, so I kind of giggled excitedly when Mark said that. So, whether or not we should be requiring future proofing with these NEVI funds, we need to hear from Montanans on, what we should be requiring when we solicit applications from whoever is going to end up applying. Another thing that Mark touched on is that until next Friday, the Federal Highway Administration is accepting another round of nominations to add additional corridors. Right now, we're not planning on submitting anything right now, although we have heard a lot of input from Montana that we should be. But if we don't do it before next Friday, that doesn't mean that for the subsequent years, this NEVI program is going to be around. And again, I mentioned it's a 5-year program, that we can't do that in future years. I think we will be doing that in future years. Some of the corridors we've heard a lot of interest in designating would be Montana Highway 200, US Highways 87, 89, 187, 287, 191. And then also, for the first time, I heard someone saying that we should be also identifying more corridors that cross the Canadian border. We have Highway 93 and I-15 going all the way up to the Canadian border right now, but should we be thinking about some of the other corridors that are further east in north central, northeastern Montana? So we'd love to hear more on suggestions there. Should there be renewable energy tied directly into these charging stations? Should there be storage? Should there be future proofing? What challenges do EV drivers face right now in Montana besides range anxiety, needing to be able to get to points further east in order to do that? What kind of safety features should we be requiring? This is the contact information. Myself, Kyla Mackey, who you heard from on one of Joel's previous webinars, are the key points of contact at DEQ. Carol Strizich, our colleague over at MDT, who I think is still on this webinar if I haven't bored her to death. She's also the main point of contact at MDT. Again, that's the website. And so if you have follow-up questions, just to try and understand a little bit more about what the NEVI program is, what DEQ's been doing, not only with the NEVI funds, but also the Volkswagen funds, I'm happy to be your main point of contact to answer those questions. But then if you have suggestions and you want to provide public input, I encourage you to use that public survey that's on the website down there below. So with that, yeah, that's all I have.
All right. Well, I've got 3 questions for you, Neal, and then I'll maybe open it up to all 3. I've got a couple questions that I'd like to ask the whole group that have come in as well. So Neal, the first one, and I think you kind of hinted a little bit about this, but somebody said that Tesla now has a CCS1 adapter. Do we see some convergence or some adapters that people can take with them to help navigate maybe these different plug technologies that aren't currently compatible?
So Tesla has an adapter so they can use CHAdeMO plugs. And so when you roll into the Cedar Lake Community Foundation, there is a CHAdeMO plug as well as a CCS combo plug. So a Tesla would be able to use Mark's charger at the Community Foundation. Vice versa, though, a non-Tesla cannot use a Tesla supercharger. There are adapters to be able to use, Tesla calls level 2 chargers destination chargers. So I'm trying to think. Well, here in Helena at the Suds Hut, down in Bozeman, I can't remember what's in Bozeman. I know there's one in Missoula or there's one in, anyway, they're all over the state. I know they're down in Big Sky too. There is an adapter so that a non-Tesla can charge in and use that Tesla plug on a destination charger, but it will not work on a supercharger. There's been rumblings over the last couple of years, including as recently as the end of 2021, that Elon Musk, Tesla, is going to open up their Tesla supercharger network and create an adapter so that non-Teslas can use those Tesla superchargers. There's a pilot program going on in Europe right now that I think is running in Denmark, France, and somewhere else. But currently in the US, there is no adapter that's working right now. So we'll see if Tesla actually follows through. But I think, like I said, with Nissan transitioning over to CCS or CHAdeMO, I think you're going to see more and more CCS plugs across the country.
All right, I'm going to give you your next two questions together because I think they're somewhat related. And the first one you might be able to pass on because I think you mentioned it after the question came in. But when do you think we might be expecting direct fast chargers on Highway 2? Second question, I know funds are limited, but Highway 200 is still left out. Are you planning on private grant making to cover those? And what's the plan for some of these truly rural areas of central and eastern Montana?
So Highway 2, I mean, it's not Highway 2, it's pretty close, but you have that Whitefish Travel Plaza that's online and operational. So that's one. From the funds from Fast Charge Your Ride that we gave directly to Town Pump for Libby and Kalispell, I believe they've put in that order already. Don't quote me on that. But as Dan alluded to, global supply chain issues still being a thing. I think that those chargers should be arriving this spring-ish, maybe early summer. I'm not entirely sure, but I think their goal is to get those three locations, Eureka, Kalispell, and Libby, online in time for summer tourism season. But that all depends on when the units actually get delivered. In terms of further east down Highway 2, we don't have anything funded that direction right now. And so we're looking right now at, with the NEVI funds, on what priority locations. You know, one thing, just looking at a map, you know, locations such as Browning and Havre would be very attractive in terms of high priority. They have a higher traffic count. They're also hubs to other key travel corridors, not alternative fuel corridors. Just so, you know, both Havre and Browning sit at the top of, you know, 87 and 89, and then those connect down to I-15 eventually. So those would be pretty interesting locations. And then certainly, you know, as you get further down the road on Highway 2, there are other, Glasgow would be another hub, I think. So Harlem, I think, as well. So we're taking a look at it, but we need to hear through the public survey what communities we should be prioritizing in each of these 5-year rounds as we start rolling out these funds. So if you have ideas, and then on the corridor designation, and we hear you loud and clear on Highway 200, with the 5 corridors we've already designated, $43 million to fill those out is going to be a stretch. We're going to stretch as far as we can. But we do know the importance of 200, 89, 87, 212, and a whole host of others, 191. So we're going to do our best, but we also do need to hear so that we can build into future years where else we should be doing.
All right, thanks, Neal. Yeah, I was thinking about Highway 200, which, if I'm correct, is through like Circle and Jordan, but there might be some 50-mile stretches where there aren't amenities, period, let alone a electric charger near them. So Let me go to Mark and Dan, and maybe Mark, I'll let you have the first one and then follow with Dan on this question. But are you getting interest from any of your fleet customers for them owning electric vehicles and maybe doing an overnight charge at their parking lot?
So we haven't been contacted by any of our fleet vehicle owners, but we have reached out to them. Once we get this managed up and running, we're going to be approaching them. We're not going to wait for them to approach us, because that is going to be a big part of a successful rollout, is especially for our loads in and around the interstate corridor. We have a number of loads near the Y, if you're familiar with Missoula. I think there are tremendous opportunities there, but no, they haven't reached out to us. I don't know that many electric vehicles at this time.
Yeah, our answer is pretty similar to that. They haven't really reached out to us yet. We are hearing we're hearing a little bit from customers, and we're in, Joel, I think you used the air quotes on urban. We're in the urban areas of Montana, so we do have some opportunity on the fleet side, but it's probably going to be more of an outreach from us. But that said, as more companies get into this scope 2 and those kinds of activities, up and down their supply chain, and they want to be less more carbon neutral, emit less carbon, I think we're going to hear more about it. So we're trying to get ahead of it. Haven't heard a lot of it yet, but we're trying to get ahead of it, and we'll probably go to them first.
The three fleets that I would flag, though, and these aren't like work trucks or passenger vehicles, but the Mountain Lion Transit Agency in Missoula, right now, their total fleet is 29 fixed route buses. And I think starting next week, 12 of them will be electrics. They just received delivery of 2 new buses that they just finished testing and training on. And I think those are going to start serving routes next week. And eventually, they have a requirement to go to 100% electric. So they're doing a lot. The University of Montana in Missoula, so far as I know, they have 4 buses with 1 diesel backup, but on a day-to-day basis, they are planning to use electric buses. And so far as I know, I think that U of M may be the first university in the country to be able to say that. They have to use the diesel every now and then because the fuel gets stale, and they have to make sure that it's still up and running. On a daily basis, 100% electric. The other one that I would flag is that not too long ago, the Lame Deer School District was awarded funding by the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, for a new electric school bus, which is the first announced electric school bus in the state of Montana, and it's very exciting. We're going to have some more announcements for municipalities and school districts coming up here, hopefully in the next month or so.
Yeah, because we're talking about school buses. We also, First Student approached us. First Student's going to do a pilot program in Billings. So first, when you think of school districts either own the bus or third party it out. First Student is one of the large third party companies that does this, and they're going to test Billings for 2 reasons, kind of like I talked about in my slides. 1, the terrain, and 2, the weather. So they're thinking if they can make it work there, they can make it work in a lot of other places that they do business, not just in Montana but all over the country. So we do have a small. It's not a pilot because they got the money for it, so they're going to do it. But we're going to be testing and getting data on a First Student situation in Billings.
Well, thank you all for chiming into that one. I'll do another one that's kind of related, and we've actually had a couple questions on this. Do any of your organizations currently operate electric vehicles yourself? And if so, what has your experience been like?
I guess I can go first. That's all right with you, Mark.
Yep.
Yeah, and this was about 5 years ago. We did a boom truck that was electric, and I think we adopted that a little bit too early because the technology wasn't as advanced, and it needed charging a lot, and our operators were kind of disappointed with its performance. But yeah, I will say that was, I think, 2015 when we put that in. So but we're definitely looking more into that now. We were part of the EEI rollout to say that we want a certain number of our fleet, both service trucks and boom trucks, to be electric by 2035, and with certain metrics, at 2025 and 2030. So we have an ongoing program to start converting ours over. We do have a couple of small service trucks and cars that we're driving around, and they are performing pretty much just like the regular cars along the highway. So, good results with them. People are happy with those. So, so for the question, we have a couple, but really what we're looking forward to is over the next, 10 years to really start morphing our entire fleet to be, both on the service side and the boom trucks, because the amount of gas or diesel that's used by our boom trucks when they're idling is pretty significant. So just getting the idle time away, and have that be on a battery is a pretty significant change. So yeah, we do have plans going for the next 10 years to start converting our fleets consistent with the EEI practices of the other investor owns around the country.
Yeah, I'll add on to that. Like Dan and Northwestern, we haven't converted any of our large trucks, our large fleet trucks. That technology we thought was a little early. They're improving those. They're improving battery capabilities, and I think that will be a big part of it. We were told earlier this week that our first electric Chevy Bolt is on a train heading for Montana. So we're excited to get that here. And the purpose for that vehicle is going to be for our use, but also for a loaner to our members. Our members will be able to come test drive it, put it through its paces, take it for a couple of days, because we think an important part of the deployment and the transition we're going through is getting people comfortable with it, getting people used to driving it, and the best way we can do that is to have one that our members can use. We also have our name on a Ford F-150, but I'm told that 2023 might be when we see that. So that will be the first actual service vehicle that we have.
All right, Neal, any electric vehicles for DEQ or maybe the state of Montana?
DEQ has 2 Chevy Volts. So this is a vehicle no longer made anymore. It's a electric motor that has a range of up to 60 miles per charge in, spring, summer conditions, but then it can also use gasoline to power the electric motor. We actually used them just yesterday to go to and from Missoula. So when you're driving on the interstate, you're probably using gas, but then using electric in town. I personally also own a Chevy Volt. The challenge, though, with our DEQ Volts is charging. We don't have a charger installed in our parking lot, so they actually haven't been charged in some time. I'm taking one down to Wyoming in about a week and a half for a work trip, so I'm probably going to take it home and charge it before then and just charge it at my house. But that's one barrier, certainly, is getting the charging infrastructure.
All right, and it's probably inappropriate to award yourself a grant to put a charger in your own parking lot. All right, well, we got about 10 minutes left, so I want to give one more general question here to everybody, and maybe Mark, will let you maybe start with this, but if people want more information on electric vehicle issues, where are places that you would send folks? And I know you already mentioned an event coming up here this fall.
Well, the first place I would direct them is to the Missoula Electric Co-op website. We have a page dedicated to EVs, the models of some conversion charts if you want to convert your cost of energy at home to the current price of fuel. Just good general information. Another resource I would suggest is calling the co-op here, Missoula Electric Co-op, and asking for my energy specialist, Dan Rogers. He's the guy who actually knows a lot more about this stuff than I do, and he could certainly help answer any questions people may have.
All right, thanks. Dan, would you like to address the same question?
Yeah, on our website we have a clean energy page, and then we have I think it's called sustainable operations or something with sustainable operations, and that has our fleet goals that are out there. So that's internal. And then, as I said in my prepared remarks, we're working through our strategy overall for the company. So we're still working on that. When we get that done, we'll probably post that on our website and have brochures and things like that. But that's still a work in process. And then, specifically for any questions related to, electric vehicles or, you know, the, just broadly, anyone can call me. Just go to just call Northwestern, just ask for me. And that my name's Dan Rausch, and you can reach me at 605-978-2902, and I can answer any of your questions. And then specifically on the fleet, another Dan Fitzpatrick is heading that up for us. So ask for Dan Fitzpatrick, and he knows inside and out what he's doing on the fleet stuff. And so if you have anything specific to fleets, the bucket trucks, the service vehicles and things like that, Fitzpatrick will have that information.
Right. Thanks, Dan. Neal.
Well, I'm certainly happy to answer questions. We are working to reach out to stakeholders regardless of the NEVI funds. We were doing it before the bipartisan infrastructure law passed. And so Kyla and myself are happy to answer questions that you might have. Look at some of the websites that I referenced during the course of this presentation or this webinar today. So not only DEQ's website, where we're soliciting information for how to plan to deploy those NEVI funds, but then also look at the Joint Office's driveelectric.gov website. That'll have a whole bunch more information on the NEVI programs in general. On the DEQ website, for Volkswagen, there will be a tab for projects if you scroll down a little bit, and you can see some of the projects we've funded already, including the charging stations that were awarded for Northwestern, Town Pump, Missoula Electric, and the Gardner Sinclair gas station. We also did a number of awards for level 2 chargers a couple of years ago, and a lot of those, because of global pandemics and supply chain issues, took a little bit longer than anticipated. But I just visited one on U of M's campus. There's a couple that will be coming online here in Helena, as well as Hamilton and a whole bunch of other places across the state. So check out those projects, and we'll be, like I said a minute ago, having some more announcements coming up, hopefully in the next month or so.
All right. Thanks, Neal. Well, this will bring us to the end of our 3-session webinar series. I want to make one ask of everybody here. We may come back and do an additional webinar if there's a topic we think we missed. If you want to send me an email or put in the chat window something we didn't cover about electric vehicles. And then too, we may just keep an eye on things. Obviously, this I think technology, policy, and things are changing. So it might be that in the fall or in the spring, we need to circle back and kind of update some things as well. So I want to thank Mark and Dan and Neal for taking the time to share their expertise with us today. I certainly learned a lot. I hope all of you participating had a chance to learn some ins and outs of what people actually are dealing with and the nuts and bolts of getting these things established and going, and more than just the concept of what an electric vehicle is. So with that, any final comments from any of our speakers?
No, thanks for having us. Happy to talk to you guys.
Thanks, Joel.
Yes,
All
thank
right.
you.
Well, thank you again for joining us. Thank you, everybody who participated. And maybe we'll be in touch in the future. And again, I'll keep the room open here for a few minutes if you've got some topics you want to share that way, or you're welcome to email them to me. So have a great day, everyone.